Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the strange and fascinating world of early medieval monks. Imagine yourself waking up before the crack of dawn, as these men of the cloth did, preparing for a day steeped in both ritual and simplicity. The air is cool, and the smell of freshly baked bread fills the monastery, a stark contrast to the hours of silence and prayer that will follow. You probably won't survive the way they did, more bread, less variety. But hey, it worked for them. Some monks lived for centuries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I love hearing from you all. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. These monks weren't just surviving. They were thriving, living in ways that seem strange by today's standards, with diets that defied both modern logic and modern science. Their daily food was simple, yet it sustained them through years of isolation, prayer, and fasting. The first thing you'll notice is the diet of bread and water. But don't be fooled. This wasn't a punishment, and it wasn't entirely out of necessity. No, this was a lifestyle. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of their meals was a choice made purely for spiritual reasons, or if it was a matter of survival in a world of scarce resources. But one thing is for certain, this humble diet didn't stop them from living long, full lives. The monks' routine of eating what was available, often more out of ritual than hunger, might be one of the key reasons why they outlived the expectations of most other people of their time. But let's take a closer look at what exactly they ate, starting with the daily bread. As you sit down for your first meal of the day, you can't help but notice how little they actually ate. The medieval monks' breakfasts weren't extravagant, if they even bothered with one. Instead, a simple bowl of barley porridge or a slice of bread dipped in water was often all they could expect. Yes, water. The kind of breakfast you might have as a last-minute decision when you're late for work, but for them it was the norm. Now, this wasn't the sad, dry bread you might be imagining. No, this was dense, hearty, and incredibly filling. And remember, it was made with barley, which was the monk's best friend. Barley provided both sustenance and energy for a day full of prayer and manual labor. Historians still argue whether the monks' reliance on barley was a matter of taste or availability. While some monks swore by the grain for its nutritional benefits, others believed it was a form of asceticism, a way to show piety through their dietary restrictions. After all, barley is cheap and grows easily, but it's not exactly a luxury food. So, while barley might not sound like a delicacy, it was practical, and in a time when life expectancy wasn't all that high, practicality was king. But here's the kicker. Despite this Spartan diet, many monks lived to be quite old, sometimes even beyond 100 years old. Was it the barley? Maybe. Or maybe it was just the slow, steady rhythm of their lives which revolved around work, prayer, and eating with intention, not indulgence. The combination of fasting, careful food choices, and physical labor created a lifestyle that was almost as sacred as their religious practices. Imagine a day spent not just working, but reflecting on the spiritual meaning behind every meal. Still, despite the simplicity, barley didn't account for everything. The monks had other secrets in their diet, too. Secrets that they probably believed helped with their longevity. Now, let's dig a little deeper into the monks' fasting habits. You'd probably be surprised to learn that fasting wasn't some sadistic practice they were forced into. No, fasting was woven into their daily routine like an essential part of their spiritual life. You might even envy the simplicity of it, no complicated calorie counting or trendy diets to follow. Instead, fasting was about nourishment for the soul, not just the body. But fasting didn't mean a complete absence of food. It simply meant refraining from certain indulgences. Historians still argue whether the monks' fasting was purely religious, a way to get closer to God, or if it was more about managing the limited resources they had. Most monasteries strictly adhered to specific days of fasting throughout the week, with meat being completely forbidden on certain days. There was even a meatless Monday tradition, long before it became a trendy hashtag. But here's the thing, they didn't starve. Instead of meat, their diet was enriched with fish, vegetables, and dairy, ensuring they still got the nutrients they needed. The medieval monks knew how to work with what they had. Perhaps the most surprising part of the fasting routine was that the monks would often fast for entire days, without feeling the weight of hunger like we might today. You see, their busy schedules kept their minds focused on prayer and work rather than on their stomachs. And it wasn't just for health, it was part of their vow of asceticism. Their philosophy was rooted in the belief that denying themselves food wasn't deprivation. It was a way to show humility and discipline. Imagine yourself walking into the monastery kitchen, greeted by the simple smells of vegetables, a few fish hanging from the ceiling, and the sight of wooden bowls filled with grains. The food wasn't the highlight of the day. It was just another tool to help them grow closer to their faith. Still, there's something fascinating about how this austere diet became not just a way to survive, but a key element of their longevity. At this point, you're probably starting to wonder, how did they survive on so little? Well, the answer lies in a fundamental part of their diet that was often overlooked by outsiders: bread. For monks, bread wasn't just food. It was a ritual. And no, it wasn't just a slice from the bakery around the corner. No, these monks baked their own bread in monastery kitchens using flour ground from barley oats, and sometimes even rye. The process was long and laborious, often taking hours or even days. And while it may sound like the most mundane part of their day, there was something oddly spiritual about this humble, hearty bread. Historians still argue whether the bread itself had any special qualities that contributed to their long lives. Some say that the simplicity of it helped maintain their health, while others point to the nutrient density of the grains they used. Whatever the case, the monks' bread wasn't made for quick consumption or indulgence. It was meant to sustain them through hours of labor, prayer, and contemplation. It was a slow, deliberate food, much like their lifestyle. Think about the way the monks approached food. It wasn't just about filling their stomachs, but about nourishment for the soul. They believed that every piece of bread was a gift from God, and the process of baking it, though arduous, was a form of worship in itself. For them, this wasn't just about survival. It was about deep spiritual meaning in the most ordinary of tasks. So, while they weren't eating 5-star meals, each bite of their bread had a significance that most of us today might overlook. But the monks didn't stop with just bread. Their diet had a secret weapon: vegetables. Yes, those humble garden greens were far more important to the monks than you might think. In fact, they were almost sacred. The monks cultivated their own vegetable gardens, often growing everything from peas and beans to cabbages, turnips, and onions. These vegetables weren't just for flavor. They were vital sources of vitamins and minerals that allowed the monks to maintain their health despite the lack of other food groups. As you wander through the monastery grounds, you'd eventually come across their gardens, a collection of vegetables, herbs, and fruits that seemed to thrive despite the harsh conditions. The monks were ahead of their time, not just in religious matters but in sustainability and self-sufficiency. These gardens were vital to their diet, and not just for nourishment. Every plant they grew was seen as a divine gift, and cultivating these crops was part of their daily rhythm. Historians still argue whether this focus on gardening was born out of necessity or genuine reverence for nature. But one thing is clear. These gardens played a crucial role in their survival. The monks' gardens were carefully tended, often structured around the principles of monastic life. The beds were organized with the same precision and discipline that marked the monks' approach to everything else. Herbs like rosemary, thyme, and sage were planted not only for flavor, but for their medicinal properties. These herbs would be used in teas and tinctures, turning the monastery's humble vegetable garden into a mini pharmacy. Imagine walking among rows of vibrant green plants, breathing in the scents of thyme and lavender, all while knowing that these plants helped the monks live longer and healthier lives. While these plants provided nutritional value, it wasn't just about sustenance. For the monks, every plant was part of a larger spiritual practice. To them, tending to the garden was an act of mindfulness, almost like prayer itself. It wasn't just about feeding the body, it was about feeding the soul. The rhythm of planting, watering, and harvesting became intertwined with their meditation practices. In a sense, their gardens were an extension of their faith, a way of connecting with God's creation on a deeper level. They didn't rush through their tasks. Instead, they approached the garden with the same slow, deliberate pace they brought to their meals and prayers. As you reflect on this practice, you start to see the connection between the monks' diet and their longevity. It wasn't just the vegetables they ate, but the way they ate them. The slow, intentional process of growing and consuming food may have been one of the keys to their unusually long lives. It wasn't about quick fixes or instant gratification, it was about the steady, mindful rhythm of life. Now, let's talk about the monks' relationship with meat. You probably know that meat was a luxury back in the day, but in the monastic life it had an even more significant place, one that went far beyond its nutritional value. Meat wasn't something they ate every day. Rather, it was reserved for special occasions, such as feast days or communal celebrations. Imagine the monks carefully planning the rare feast days when meat would grace their tables. These were the days they could indulge in something as extravagant as roasted lamb or salted fish. But even then, there were rules and rituals attached to the meal. Historians still argue whether the monks' avoidance of meat was purely for spiritual reasons or simply out of necessity. While some believed abstaining from meat brought them closer to God, others think it was more about avoiding indulgence, a way to maintain discipline in the face of temptation. Yet, despite the rarity of meat in their diet, the monks didn't suffer from malnutrition. Thanks to their reliance on vegetables, grains, and fish, they were able to maintain a healthy balance, proving that a diet centered around plant-based foods could provide everything the body needed. But here's the catch. While meat was a rare treat, they never completely abandoned it. Instead, it was treated as something sacred, consumed only on the most meaningful of occasions. This careful management of food wasn't just about the body, though. It was a spiritual practice. The monks believed that the act of eating meat when it did happen had a sacred quality to it. Each bite was consumed with reverence, almost as if they were acknowledging the life that had been given for their nourishment. The communal meals on feast days were marked by prayer, reflection, and gratitude. Each bite of meat, each morsel of bread, a reminder of their faith and their commitment to simplicity. And it wasn't just the meat they ate that had special meaning. The way they prepared and served their food was as much a part of their spiritual practice as the eating itself. The kitchens, though simple, were filled with rituals with specific times for preparation, cooking, and serving. Even the way they washed their hands before a meal became a ritualistic act, a chance to cleanse themselves both physically and spiritually before ingesting their food. As you move from the kitchen to the dining hall, the stillness of the room becomes noticeable. The monks' meals weren't rushed or accompanied by chatter. Instead, their meal times were quiet and deliberate, with silence taking center stage. Eating was seen as an act of reflection, a way to nourish both the body and the spirit. It was a time to center the mind away from the distractions of the world. Imagine sitting down at one of those long wooden tables, the air thick with the scent of barley bread and a faint hint of simmering stew. As you sit in silence, the meal is consumed slowly, each bite savored in mindfulness. Historians still argue whether the silence during meals was merely a reflection of their asceticism or a deeper spiritual practice. Some scholars believe that the monks' strict focus on silence allowed them to connect more deeply with their inner selves and with God. It's also possible that the quietude helped them maintain discipline, preventing any distractions or frivolity that could come with communal eating. However, one thing is certain: the absence of idle chatter during meals allowed the monks to fully focus on the spiritual aspects of their daily routine. Their meals weren't just about nutrition, they were about prayer contemplation and gratitude. The fact that meals were eaten in silence might seem unusual to us, especially in today's world, where mealtime is often filled with conversation or entertainment. But for the monks, silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was sacred. It allowed them to reflect on the food they were consuming and the work they were doing. Each meal became a moment to slow down and truly appreciate the simplicity of life. So, while the food may have been simple, it carried immense spiritual significance far beyond what we might think of today. In the midst of this quietude, food wasn't just a way to fill the stomach. The food itself was viewed as a gift, a means of aligning themselves with their higher purpose. Every bite was a way to strengthen their devotion. Imagine yourself sitting there, the silence punctuated only by the occasional clink of a spoon or the scraping of bread against a wooden table. It was a ritual, and for the monks it was just as important as their prayers. Now, let's step into the next part of their diet that helped define their lifestyle: herbs and medicinal plants. The monks were among the first to systematically use herbs for medicinal purposes. While many people simply relied on whatever herbs they had in their gardens for cooking, monks took it a step further by learning the healing properties of plants. And let me tell you, they weren't just adding herbs for flavor. These plants were their medicine, their cure-all, and in many cases, their survival tool. The garden wasn't just about vegetables. It was a treasure trove of remedies that helped them endure the hardships of their harsh lives. Historians still argue whether the monks' use of medicinal herbs was simply practical or whether it held deeper spiritual significance. Some claim that using herbs for healing was seen as a way to reconnect with nature's divine gifts, while others believe it was a more pragmatic approach to health in a time when doctors were scarce and often unreliable. Either way, the monks' knowledge of plants was far ahead of their time. They used herbs like sage, rosemary, and thyme to treat everything from headaches to digestive issues. For a monk suffering from a sore throat, a simple tea made with thyme was often their go-to remedy. For indigestion, a pinch of fennel or peppermint. But there was more to this than just health. Many monks believed that consuming certain herbs wasn't just about treating ailments, it was a spiritual act. They believed that herbs like lavender and chamomile, which were used to calm the mind and aid sleep, had a spiritual healing aspect. By consuming these herbs, they were not only healing their bodies, but also their souls. Imagine walking through a monastery garden at dusk, the air thick with the scent of calming herbs. Each plant you pass has a purpose, whether for physical healing or for restoring peace to the mind. And let's not forget about honey, the monk's sweet secret weapon. Honey was far more than a simple sweetener. It had medicinal uses too. Honey was often used in poultices to heal wounds, soothe sore throats, and even act as an antibacterial agent. The monks treasured honey as a divine gift, using it not just to sweeten their food, but also to aid in their healing. In fact, the process of beekeeping became an important part of monastic life. Picture a monk carefully tending to a hive, the hum of the bees filling the air, knowing that the honey harvested would not only sweeten his bread, but help him live a healthier life. Now, let's turn our attention to the most intriguing part of the monk's diet, the consumption of wine. Yes, wine. You might be surprised to learn that monks weren't just getting by on water and bread, they had wine too, and it wasn't merely for religious ceremonies. While wine was indeed used in the Eucharist, it also played a key role in their daily meals, albeit in moderation. The wine of the time was often not the refined aged varieties we think of today, but rather a rough fermented beverage that could be quite strong and earthy. Yet it was still revered and treated with respect in the monastic community. Historians still argue whether the monks' consumption of wine was purely religious as a form of spiritual communion, or if it was simply a practical necessity. During this period, clean water could be hard to come by, especially in rural areas, and wine was often safer to drink than potentially contaminated water. The alcohol content, while higher than what we might expect today, had a purifying effect, killing harmful bacteria. So, for the monks, drinking wine wasn't about indulgence or revelry. It was about health and survival, albeit in a slightly more pleasant way. Picture yourself sitting at one of those long stone monastery tables, sipping a small goblet of wine as the soft light from a flickering candle casts shadows on the stone walls. The wine wasn't consumed in excess, but it was a regular part of their diet. It was a way to mark the evening, a subtle reminder of their connection to both the divine and the earthly. The monks were well aware that the wine wasn't just about the taste. It was a way to slow down, to meditate, and to be present. In this calm, reflective atmosphere, the wine became a tool for mindfulness, helping the monks center themselves at the end of a long day of prayer and work. But it wasn't just about the alcohol. Some monks believed that the fermented nature of the wine itself had a spiritual quality. They saw it as a living, breathing entity, something that evolved over time just as they did in their spiritual practice. The aging of wine mirrored their own process of spiritual growth. As the wine matured, so did they becoming stronger and more refined in their faith. The metaphor was powerful, and the ritual of drinking wine became a constant reminder of the monk's journey of self-discipline and spiritual nourishment. While wine might have been the drink of choice for many monks, let's not overlook the humble role of cheese in their diet. Cheese, particularly hard cheeses like cheddar or Gouda, was a staple in their meals. But what made cheese so important wasn't just its ability to add variety to their limited menu. It had a deeper significance. For the monks, cheese wasn't merely a food, it was a product of their labor. The process of making cheese, from milking the cows to curdling the milk and aging the cheese, was a meditative practice. It wasn't rushed. Like everything else in their diet, it was slow, deliberate, and full of purpose. Historians still argue whether the monks' obsession with cheese was purely practical, or if there was a spiritual connection as well. Some scholars suggest that cheese with its long shelf life allowed the monks to eat a highly nutritious food, even during lean times when other food supplies were low. Cheese was a source of fat protein and calcium-important nutrients that would sustain them through fasting periods or long hours of physical labor. Others point to the fact that the process of making cheese was deeply tied to the cycles of nature, another aspect of monastic life that focused on reverence for the earth. Imagine yourself in the monastery kitchen watching a monk carefully turn the curds and weigh his hands moving with precision as he performs this sacred act of creation. It wasn't just about making food. It was about making something that would nourish both the body and the soul. Cheese, like wine, had the potential to foster mindfulness, to remind them of the simple, patient rhythms of life. It was food for both the body and the spirit, reinforcing their belief that even the most mundane tasks could be an expression of their devotion. But there's also a bit of mystery surrounding how the monks made their cheese. The techniques used in medieval monasteries were not as sophisticated as modern methods, and they often relied on trial and error to get the right consistency and flavor. Some monks even experimented with adding herbs and spices to their cheeses, creating unique flavors that were revered throughout the region. The art of cheese-making in these monasteries would go on to influence some of the finest cheeses we enjoy today. So, when you sit down to a rich, flavorful cheese, think of the monks who first pioneered the art of cheese-making, and of how that simple food helped sustain their remarkably long lives. Now, let's move on to another key component of the monks' peculiar diet: eggs. You may not think much of eggs in today's world. They're a breakfast staple or a simple ingredient in many dishes. But for the monks, eggs were more than just a meal. They were an essential part of their limited but surprisingly nutritious diet. Unlike meat, which was reserved for special occasions, eggs were a more common source of protein, and they weren't just for eating. They were used in a variety of ways that added both sustenance and spiritual meaning to their lives. Historians still debate whether the monks' regular consumption of eggs was rooted in practicality or ritual. On one hand, eggs were an easy source of protein fat and vitamins, providing the monks with the energy they needed to sustain their rigorous daily schedules of prayer work and fasting. On the other hand, eggs also had a more symbolic role in their lives. Many monks saw eggs as a symbol of rebirth and renewal. The egg, with its delicate shell, was seen as a representation of the soul, fragile but full of potential. Eating eggs became a way of embracing the idea of spiritual renewal with every meal. Picture yourself in the kitchen of a monastery, watching as a monk cracks an egg into a bowl. It's a simple act, but one filled with reverence. The egg might be whisked into a soup or added to a batter for bread. Some monks even believed that consuming eggs was a way to maintain a balance between their physical and spiritual selves. Eating something as simple as an egg prepared with care and mindfulness helped the monks stay connected to both the physical world and the divine. But here's the fascinating part. The monks didn't just consume eggs in their natural form. They had ways of preparing them that were thought to have special health benefits. Boiled eggs were sometimes eaten as a remedy for digestive issues or stomach pains. Eggs were also used in herbal concoctions mixed with other ingredients to create tonics for everything from headaches to insomnia. For the monks, eggs were much more than just food. They were medicine, nourishment, and even a tool for spiritual practice. You might think by now that the monk's diet is pretty straightforward: bread, water, vegetables, herbs, and the occasional indulgence like wine or cheese. But their meals were more than just functional. They were often surrounded by rituals and blessings that turned each bite into a form of worship. In fact, mealtime in a monastery was a sacred event, one that involved careful thought and an awareness of the divine. The monks didn't just eat. They participated in a deeply meditative process, reflecting on the gift of life and sustenance. Historians still argue whether these meal rituals were purely about piety, or if they were a method to keep the monks grounded, providing structure to their otherwise austere lives. Some scholars believe that these rituals were designed to create a sense of gratitude for the food they consumed, which might explain why the monks took such care in preparing and presenting even the simplest of meals. Every meal was seen as a reminder of their vows and of their connection to the divine. Imagine yourself sitting at a long wooden table with the other monks. Before the meal begins, you all bow your heads in silent prayer. It's not just a prayer for the food, but a moment to reflect on the blessings that this food represents. Then, as the meal is served, you eat slowly, savoring each bite, knowing that it isn't just about nourishment, it's about honoring the life that sustains you. The bread isn't just bread. The vegetables aren't just vegetables. Each item is a sacred gift, a part of God's creation, and the act of consuming it is an acknowledgement of that. But even in this spiritual context, there was room for indulgence. The monks occasionally held feast days when the rules of simplicity were relaxed for a special meal. These meals were the exceptions, not the rule. On feast days, meat, wine, and sweets were served, and the atmosphere was far more communal than usual. These moments were meant to celebrate the unity of the monastic community and to enjoy a brief break from their usual austere lifestyle. But even during these times, the food was treated with reverence. It wasn't about overindulgence. It was about honoring the rare privilege of enjoying something a little richer than usual. While we've touched on how the monks viewed food as a divine offering, let's also look at the practical side of things, how they kept their food from going bad. You might think of today's convenience of refrigeration, but back then, preserving food required a lot of ingenuity. The monks were ahead of their time, developing methods to store and preserve food that would help them survive through the lean months when fresh produce was hard to come by. They didn't have modern-day fridges, of course, but they had a whole host of methods that helped them stockpile the essentials. Historians still argue whether the monks' preservation methods were born from necessity or genius. Some say that preserving food was a matter of survival, while others believe it was part of the monks' deep connection to the land and their ability to live in harmony with nature. They used techniques like drying, salting, pickling, and fermenting, all of which extended the life of their food and allowed them to eat year-round even during winter months when fresh vegetables were scarce. Imagine a monk carefully salting away a side of fish, knowing that this simple act would ensure they had enough food to last through a harsh winter. Or, picture yourself in a cool stone cellar surrounded by jars of pickled vegetables, cheeses aging to perfection, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Every jar, every piece of preserved food was a product of the monks' slow, deliberate work. It was an art as much as it was a necessity, and this meticulous attention to food preservation wasn't just about convenience. It was a way of showing respect for the resources they had. Waste was unthinkable to them, and so every scrap of food was carefully preserved, used to its fullest. In addition to preserving food, the monks also created their own alcohol to help with both nutrition and preservation. Beer, for example, was brewed in many monasteries and served as a staple beverage. While it wasn't as refined as the beer we know today, it had a high nutritional value, thanks to the barley used in the brewing process. The monks didn't drink beer to get drunk. They drank it as a way to supplement their diet, especially during times of fasting or when other sources of nourishment were in short supply. Speaking of beer, we can't overlook the monks' contribution to brewing, which was no small feat. In fact, many of the brewing techniques that were developed by monks in medieval times laid the foundation for some of the most famous beers of today. You see, beer wasn't just a casual drink for the monks, it was a vital part of their daily routine, and it had deep spiritual and nutritional significance. What they brewed wasn't the modern, mass-produced beer you find at your local pub today. It was often a thick, rich, and hearty beverage, one that packed a punch both in taste and in calories. Historians still argue whether the monks were motivated by faith or the practical need for sustenance when they began brewing beer. Some scholars suggest that brewing was a way to support the monastery's financial needs. After all, beer was a commodity that could be sold or traded. But many monks also believed that brewing beer was a holy endeavor, a way to provide for the community while also maintaining the principles of asceticism. Beer wasn't seen as a drink for excess. It was considered a practical food source, especially in regions where fresh water was unsafe to drink. Beer was often safer to consume than water, which could be contaminated. Imagine yourself in the monastery's stone brewery, surrounded by barrels of brewing malt and hops. The air is thick with the smell of fermentation, as the monks with their expert knowledge prepare a batch of beer. For them, brewing was more than just a way to get a drink. It was a meditative process, a practice of patience and precision. They didn't just throw ingredients together and hope for the best. They followed specific rituals using techniques passed down through generations. This wasn't just about creating beer. It was about crafting something sacred. And just as with their food, the monks approached beer with reverence. It wasn't something to be consumed mindlessly. Each glass of beer was enjoyed, slowly savored with intention. The monks believed that even drinking like eating was a spiritual practice. They didn't indulge in excess, but rather consumed in moderation, recognizing the gift of the beer as part of the natural world, and a tool to sustain their bodies in their spiritual journey. Let's now turn our attention to the rare but vital indulgences that monks did allow themselves, fruits and sweets. These were luxury items in the medieval world, and were often reserved for special feast days or significant religious celebrations. The consumption of fruits and sweets wasn't part of their regular diet, but when they did indulge, it was usually in a manner befitting their ascetic lifestyle, simple, modest, and always with deep reverence for the bounty of nature. Historians still debate whether these indulgences were a treat or an essential part of their spiritual practices. On one hand, fruits like apples, pears, and plums were packed with nutrients and served as a source of sweetness and variety in an otherwise bland diet. On the other hand, sugary treats often made with honey or fruit were thought to have a more symbolic role. For the monks, indulging in sweets wasn't about overindulgence, but about celebrating the divine creation of nature's sweet gifts in moderation. Imagine the scene: a feast day has arrived, and the smell of freshly baked fruit tarts wafts through the air of the monastery's dining hall. The monks gather together not in excess, but in appreciation, savoring the rich sweetness of the tarts and fruits, knowing that such delicacies are rare and precious. The fruit might be a simple apple or a small bowl of berries, but it is consumed with joy, knowing that it's a blessing, not a mere indulgence. It was a time for the monks to reflect on the seasons, the cycles of nature, and the gifts they had received from God. Despite the relative rarity of sweets, the monks didn't completely forego sugar. Instead, they relied on honey, which had both nutritional and medicinal properties. Honey was used not only to sweeten their food, but also as a remedy for ailments like sore throats and wounds. Imagine the monks adding a dollop of honey to their herbal tea, the rich, golden liquid, a symbol of both nourishment and healing. It wasn't just a treat, it was part of their holistic approach to well-being, combining the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of health. And while fruits and sweets were rare, they were far from forgotten. On special days, when the regular routine of fasting was set aside, these sweet offerings became a way for the monks to celebrate the life they were given and the community they had built. Now, let's talk about the monks' seemingly endless patience and their relationship with time. It's not just their food that was slow, it was their entire lifestyle. Everything the monks did from eating to working to praying was conducted with deliberate care and slow, methodical precision. You see, life in a monastery wasn't about rushing. In fact, time itself was viewed as sacred. The monks believed that every moment, no matter how mundane, was an opportunity to grow closer to God, and their diet was no exception to this. Food was to be consumed slowly with purpose. It wasn't about satisfying hunger quickly. It was about nourishing the body and soul through each bite. Historians still argue whether the monks' slower pace of life, especially when it came to eating, was a cultural necessity or a spiritual discipline. Some believe that their slower pace helped preserve energy and maintain health in a time when nutrition was inconsistent. Others argue that the monastic commitment to slowing down was primarily a spiritual practice, a way of aligning their physical bodies with their higher calling. The monks' deliberate approach to eating was an extension of their larger spiritual discipline, a commitment to the rhythm of slow, mindful living. Imagine yourself sitting at a long wooden table, the smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables filling the air, as you eat at a pace that feels almost meditative. There's no rush, no distractions. The monks ate their meals with the same focused attention that they gave to their prayers. Each bite, each sip was a way to center themselves. And in a world that often moves too quickly, it's easy to see the appeal of that. With every chew, they were reminded of the divine, and every meal became a small act of devotion. This slow eating ritual wasn't just for spiritual purposes, however. It was a way to maintain health. By taking their time, monks avoided overeating, which could have been a real concern in times of food scarcity. In a time when most people ate quickly out of necessity or gluttony, the monks' slow, deliberate consumption allowed them to stay healthy, focused, and spiritually attuned. It was a method of moderation that helped them avoid the physical discomfort that might come from too much indulgence. As you reflect on the slow pace of the monks' meals, it's clear that they were not only concerned with what they ate, but also how and why they ate. Their approach to food was rooted in a profound respect for the body, the earth, and the divine. But there's one more aspect of their diet that demands our attention: the monks' use of fasting. Fasting wasn't just an occasional practice, it was an integral part of their spiritual journey. While today, fasting might be seen as a physical cleanse or weight loss tactic for the monks, it was about something much deeper. Fasting was about purifying both the body and the soul, ridding themselves of earthly desires and drawing closer to God. Historians still debate whether fasting was practiced as a spiritual tool, a physical necessity, or a combination of both. Some scholars argue that fasting helped the monks focus both spiritually and mentally by cutting out distractions and indulgences. Others believe it was more about embracing suffering and sacrifice as a way to better understand the challenges of Christ. Regardless of the exact motivation, the monks' commitment to fasting was strict, and it was a practice that defined their relationship with food. Picture yourself in the monastery, knowing that you are about to begin a day of fasting. The food you would normally enjoy has been set aside, and instead you prepare for hours of reflection and prayer. Your mind is focused, your body cleansed from the indulgence of the previous days. While fasting, the monks would often drink only water, or perhaps a thin vegetable broth, giving their bodies a break from solid food. The idea wasn't to suffer unnecessarily, but to purify oneself both physically and spiritually, even when fasting food was still treated with respect. It wasn't viewed as a punishment, but as an act of devotion. During the fast, the monks would focus on prayer, using the time away from food to deepen their connection to the divine. Imagine the quiet peace of the monastery as you sit in contemplation, your stomach empty, but your mind full of purpose. The silence is deafening yet peaceful. Each moment is a small act of surrender, surrendering to the will of God, to the routine of monastic life, and to the rhythm of fasting that brought both clarity and discipline. But fasting wasn't just about abstaining from food, it also played a significant role in the monks' connection to nature. You see, their reliance on the cycles of nature wasn't just philosophical, it was practical. The monks paid close attention to the changing seasons and how they influenced both their diet and their daily lives. Their food habits were dictated not just by religious requirements, but by the natural rhythms of the earth. In many ways, this deep connection to nature helped them live harmoniously with the world around them, utilizing what the earth had to offer in each season. Historians still argue whether the monks' seasonal approach to food was driven more by the necessity of survival or a deeper spiritual practice. Some claim that the monks' reliance on seasonal foods was purely practical, a way to work with the environment's natural cycles and ensure they always had what they needed. Others believe that the monks saw the changing seasons as symbolic of their own spiritual journey, always evolving, always transforming, but always rooted in the same sacred rhythms. Either way, the monks' connection to nature was an integral part of their food practices and their overall approach to life. Imagine yourself walking through the monastery grounds as the seasons change. In spring, fresh herbs and vegetables begin to grow in the garden, signaling the renewal of life. Summer brings an abundance of fruits, and the air is rich with the scent of ripening berries and apples. In the fall, the harvest comes in, and the monks carefully store the bounty for the long, cold months ahead. By winter, the focus shifts to preserving the food they have grown with pickling, drying and salting used to make sure nothing goes to waste. Each season, with its own food offerings, mirrors the monks' own spiritual cycles. A time for reflection, a time for growth, a time for rest, and a time for renewal. The monks' understanding of these natural rhythms influenced not only what they ate, but how they viewed the world. They saw everything as part of a greater divine plan each season. Each food, each fast, and each feast was an opportunity to reflect on the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. It was a way of aligning themselves with the natural world and ultimately with the divine order of things. Let's now shift our focus to one of the more fascinating aspects of the monks' diet, their reliance on medicinal foods and tonics. While today we might turn to a medicine cabinet for our ailments, the monks often turned to their gardens, their pantries, and their kitchens to find the cures for what ailed them. They were pioneers of herbal medicine, using everything from honey to garlic to treat a range of illnesses. Their approach to health was holistic, focusing not just on the physical body, but on balancing mind, spirit, and nature. Historians still debate whether the monks' use of medicinal herbs was rooted in deep spiritual practices or was simply a matter of practicality. Many believe it was a mixture of both. On one hand, the monks saw their use of herbs as a way to connect with the divine using God's creation to heal their bodies. On the other hand, their herbal remedies were pragmatic solutions to the ailments they faced, given the lack of modern medical care. Imagine walking through the monastery's herb garden, the earthy scent of sage lavender and rosemary filling the air. You reach for a handful of chamomile used to treat insomnia and peppermint, often brewed into a tea to ease an upset stomach. These plants weren't just food, they were medicine carefully tended by the monks who relied on them for both healing and nourishment. The monks didn't just consume these herbs casually. They respected them, understanding that each plant had a role to play in their overall health. Some of the more interesting remedies involved combinations of foods and herbs that might seem odd today, but were seen as incredibly effective back then. Garlic, for example, wasn't just used in cooking. It was known for its powerful medicinal properties, particularly for boosting the immune system and treating colds. Honey, another monk favorite, wasn't just a sweetener. It was used in everything from wound care to treating sore throats. The monks knew the value of natural ingredients, and turned to them time and time again, relying on centuries-old knowledge passed down from generation to generation. So, next time you take a sip of herbal tea or use honey as a remedy, remember that these practices have deep roots in the monastic tradition. The monks were living proof that sometimes nature provides everything you need for health and healing. As we continue to explore the monks' approach to food and health, it's important to touch on the significance of dairy products in their diet. While dairy wasn't consumed as frequently as other foods, it played an essential role, particularly in providing the monks with the necessary fats and proteins for a balanced diet. Milk, butter, and cheese were some of the key dairy items they consumed, and many monks were responsible for tending to the cows and goats that provided the milk. Historians still debate whether dairy was viewed as a divine gift or a necessity for survival. Some believe the monks regarded dairy as a way to honor God's creation by nurturing the animals and using their milk for sustenance. Others think that dairy, particularly butter and milk, was simply an efficient way to get the nutrients they needed, especially given the limitations of their diet. Whatever the reason, the inclusion of dairy in their diet gave them access to the energy and nutrition needed to maintain their demanding routines. Imagine the peaceful hum of the monastery early in the morning as the monks milked their cows and goats. The fresh milk was then carefully turned into butter or cheese, and the cream was sometimes used to make rich, comforting broths. Butter, though a luxury for some, was part of the monks' diet in a controlled, thoughtful way. It wasn't something consumed in excess, but rather in moderation a source of fat that helped sustain them during long periods of fasting or physical labor. The monks' use of dairy didn't stop at the table. They also understood the healing power of milk and its derivatives. Milk was often used to soothe irritated skin or to calm digestive issues. Cheese, particularly soft cheeses, was used to treat ailments like colic or to restore strength after illness. Imagine how the monks, having lived through harsh winters and long fasts, would rely on the simple but effective properties of dairy products to stay healthy and strong. As we continue exploring the monks' peculiar diet, one aspect we can't overlook is their use of seasonal food preservation techniques. While their access to fresh produce was often limited by the harsh climates of medieval Europe, the monks developed methods to preserve food throughout the year. This wasn't just about having enough to eat, It was about having the right food when it was needed most. The monks' ability to store and preserve food for long periods played a crucial role in their ability to live sustainably and healthily. Historians still argue whether the monks' dedication to food preservation was born from practical necessity or spiritual discipline. Some believe it was a means of survival in an unpredictable world, where crop failures and harsh winters were common. Others contend that preserving food was a spiritual act, a way to honor God's bounty and make the most of every resource available. Either way, their food preservation methods were sophisticated for the time and allowed them to thrive in an otherwise precarious existence. Imagine the monks carefully drying herbs in the sun, or using salt to cure fish and meats. These preservation methods weren't just about keeping food from spoiling, they were about extending the life of their harvest and making the most of the earth's natural gifts. In the winter, when fresh vegetables and fruits were hard to come by, the monks would turn to their stores of dried beans, preserved fruits, and pickled vegetables to maintain their health. These preserved foods were vital for their survival, providing essential nutrients during the cold months when fresh food wasn't available. Preserving food was also a communal activity. The entire monastery participated in the harvest, the curing, and the storing. It was an act that brought the community together and reinforced their shared purpose. The act of preserving food in a way reflected their monastic vows. It was about working together, using what they had to sustain one another, and making the most of what God provided. In addition to the practical benefits of food preservation, there was another fascinating aspect of the monks' diet, the special importance they placed on fasting and abstinence during certain periods of the year. Fasting wasn't just a random event. It followed a strict calendar tied to religious observances and the liturgical year. During Lent, Advent, and other times of spiritual significance, the monks would completely abstain from certain foods, including meat, eggs, and dairy. But what's remarkable is how they didn't just endure this deprivation, they embraced it as a way of spiritual purification. Historians still argue whether fasting was intended more for spiritual growth or as a physical detox. On one hand, fasting provided a way to detach from worldly pleasures, reminding the monks of the transient nature of life and reinforcing their commitment to God. On the other hand, fasting also had practical benefits, allowing the monks to rest from the heavier, richer foods and focus their energy on prayer and reflection. Whichever way you look at it, fasting was a central part of their diet, a key component of their lifestyle and their faith. Imagine the stillness of the monastery during a fasting period. The usual bustling of the kitchens is replaced by an air of quiet reverence. Meals are simple, perhaps just bread, vegetables, and water. There's no rush to eat. Instead, the monks partake in their meals slowly with mindfulness and intention. Every bite, no matter how small, is a reminder of their commitment to their vows. Fasting wasn't just about food. It was about cultivating discipline, humility, and a deeper connection to the divine. While fasting periods may have been austere, they also held a sense of anticipation. After weeks of abstaining from rich food, the feast days would arrive, and with them, a chance to celebrate the end of the fast. These were times for the monks to come together to share in the abundance that had been reserved for special occasions, and to reflect on the lessons of restraint they had learned. Feast days were rare but sacred, and when they did occur, they were marked by the consumption of meat, wine, and other delicacies. But even then, the meals were consumed with gratitude and mindfulness, never to excess. As we reflect on the monks' fasting practices and their approach to feast days, it's important to look at the overall rhythm of their diet. The monks weren't just consuming food, they were participating in a careful and deliberate lifestyle that revolved around fasting, feasting, and everything in between. Each meal was a moment of mindfulness, each fast a form of spiritual growth, and each feast a celebration of divine providence. Their diet wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving within the framework of their vows, beliefs, and practices. Historians still debate whether this strict diet governed by religious observances and the calendar had more to do with asceticism, or with the monks' desire to live in closer harmony with nature and God's will. While some believe the monks' lifestyle was one of deprivation, others argue that it was simply one of mindful balance where the focus wasn't on excess, but on the sufficiency of what was given. Regardless of the reasoning, the monks' food habits were deeply entwined with their spirituality, creating a lifestyle that was sustainable not only for their bodies, but for their souls. Picture yourself at a monk's table during a feast day. After weeks of simple fare, there's a rich stew made with vegetables and perhaps a rare piece of meat. The table is filled with bread, cheese, honey, and wine. The monks seated together in silence are not indulging recklessly, but savoring the gifts of the earth, using each bite to honor the sacrifices made during fasting. The feast is not just about enjoying food, it's a way to reconnect with the abundance that they believe is provided by God. There's no gluttony, just gratitude. And after the meal, the stillness returns, the tables are cleared, and the monks resume their spiritual practice, reminded once again of the cyclical nature of life. A time for fasting, a time for feasting, and a time for reflection. It's this balanced approach to food that helped the monks live such long, fulfilling lives. They didn't overindulge in any one food. They ate with purpose, reflecting the same slow, steady pace that defined their lives. This thoughtful approach to their meals, combined with their fasting and feasting cycles, ensured they had the energy they needed for work, prayer, and contemplation, while maintaining physical health and spiritual clarity. Now that we've explored the more routine aspects of the monks' diet, it's time to take a closer look at the health benefits of this peculiar way of living. The combination of fasting, moderate eating, and reliance on whole natural foods helped the monks maintain not just physical health, but mental clarity and spiritual focus. Today, we know that a balanced plant-based diet with moderate calorie intake can lead to longer, healthier lives, something the monks seem to have intuitively understood long before modern science caught up. Historians still debate whether the monks' exceptional longevity was due to their diet alone, or the overall lifestyle they led. Some believe their physical health was largely a result of their strict routine, and the physical labor they performed daily, whether it was in the garden, the kitchen, or during prayers. Others suggest that their deep commitment to spiritual practices, which helped reduce stress and cultivate inner peace, played just as important a role. But what we do know is that the monks' balanced diet, rich in grains, vegetables, and healthy fats, played a crucial role in their ability to live longer, healthier lives. Imagine a monk in his later years still strong and able to work in the garden, still capable of holding prayer services, all while living a life of simplicity and moderation. The benefits of the monks' diet extended beyond just avoiding illness. They had the energy and stamina to maintain their monastic duties well into old age. Their diet didn't just help them survive. It allowed them to thrive in ways that most people at the time simply couldn't. While their lifestyle may have seemed austere to outsiders, it was actually a recipe for longevity, one that combined physical care, mental discipline, and spiritual connection. The monks' diet, along with their focus on community hard work and reflection, provided a holistic approach to health that went beyond the physical body. Their meals were about more than just sustenance. they were a means of fostering harmony between the body, mind, and soul. In a world where most people struggled to make it to middle age, the monks demonstrated that living slowly, eating mindfully, and embracing simplicity could lead to a fulfilling, long life. As we continue to examine the monks' diet and lifestyle, it's essential to consider how their practices influenced not only their own health, but the broader community around them. Their approach to food and eating was a model of sustainability. In a time when the outside world was often unstable, plagued by famine, war, and disease, the monks created communities that were self-sufficient. Their monasteries were often the heart of agricultural and culinary innovation in their regions, providing food medicine and education to those who lived nearby. Historians still debate how much of this agricultural ingenuity was intentional versus a result of necessity. While the monks' primary goal was spiritual, their practical solutions to the challenges of food production and preservation inadvertently had a far-reaching impact. The knowledge they developed about growing crops, cultivating gardens, and creating food from scratch laid the groundwork for agricultural advancements that would influence the rest of society. Imagine yourself in the monk's garden where rows of neatly tended vegetables and herbs are carefully cultivated. The garden wasn't just a place to grow food, it was a space for education where monks could teach others about the importance of sustainable living and responsible resource management. This knowledge was passed on to neighboring communities who came to rely on the monks for advice on farming, preserving food, and using natural remedies. The monks were the unsung pioneers of sustainable living, cultivating food that not only nourished their own community, but also supported those in the villages surrounding the monastery. In addition to providing for the local community, the monks also contributed to food security on a larger scale. Their preservation techniques, including drying, salting, and fermenting, were vital for sustaining both the monastery and the villages during harsh winters or periods of drought. By sharing their methods and knowledge, the monks helped ensure that their communities had food year-round, creating a sense of stability in an otherwise unpredictable world. Through this, the monks demonstrated that simplicity and sustainability weren't just philosophical ideals. They were practical necessities that could shape communities and impact the larger world. Their commitment to mindful eating, growing food, and respecting the resources available to them created a legacy of sustainability that continues to inspire today. As we continue to unravel the remarkable lifestyle of the monks, it's clear that food was far from a simple necessity. It was a tool for cultivating a deeper connection with the world around them. This connection wasn't just spiritual. It was also grounded in the physical reality of their relationship with nature and the resources available to them. The monks didn't just consume food, they reverently participated in a larger cycle of life, one that required patience, respect, and mindfulness. Their diet reflected their belief that everything on earth was sacred, from the grains they harvested to the vegetables they grew. Historians still debate whether the monks' relationship with food was shaped by their spiritual practices or their natural environment. While the spiritual aspect is undeniable, food, after all, was seen as a gift from God. Many scholars also point to the environment and the necessity of adapting to the land. The monks understood that their survival depended on working in harmony with the earth. Their sustainable farming practices, their careful preservation techniques, and their respect for the natural world were all grounded in the understanding that food was a gift to be used wisely and with reverence. Picture yourself in the monastery kitchen once more, preparing a meal using the fruits of your labor. You gather vegetables from the garden, eggs from the hens, and maybe a little cheese from the dairy. You've spent hours, days, even seasons cultivating these resources. Each plant, each ingredient, is a result of patience and care. As you prepare the meal, there's no rush. Everything is done slowly with intention. It's not just a meal you're preparing. It's a way to honor the work you've put into creating it, and the divine creation that made it possible. The monks' attention to the smallest details in their food and daily lives wasn't just a form of asceticism. It was a way of achieving harmony with the earth, with themselves, and with God. They weren't simply abstaining from food as a form of sacrifice. They were finding a balance between living in the world and being separate from it. Their diet was a reflection of that balance, simple but purposeful, plain but sacred. This deep connection between food spirituality and sustainability wasn't just a means to survive, it was a way of thriving. The monks' food practices helped them lead long, healthy lives in the most peaceful and fulfilling way possible, all while remaining true to their vows of simplicity and devotion. In a world where fast food and instant gratification rule, it's a stark contrast to think of a life so grounded in the rhythms of nature, where food wasn't just fuel, but a sacred practice to be cherished. As we reflect on the profound connection between the monks' diet and their spiritual practices, it's impossible to ignore the role of community in their lifestyle. While food was an individual necessity, the monks' meals were often shared with others in a communal setting, reinforcing the sense of brotherhood and unity that was central to monastic life. Eating together wasn't just a practical choice. It was an expression of their shared commitment to their faith and to one another. In fact, the communal aspect of meals was one of the most important elements of monastic life, bringing them closer as a spiritual family. Historians still debate the precise role that communal meals played in strengthening the monks' unity. But there's no denying that eating together created a sense of solidarity and shared purpose. For the monks, food wasn't just fuel for the body. It was a symbol of their collective journey toward holiness. In a world where individualism was often the norm, the monastic community's focus on collective eating highlighted the importance of connection both to one another and to God. Imagine yourself in the refectory, sitting at a long wooden table surrounded by your fellow monks. The air is quiet, filled with the soft murmur of prayer and the rhythmic clink of spoons against bowls. The meal is simple, perhaps a bowl of barley soup or a slice of bread, but it's shared in the spirit of community. You don't just eat to fill your stomach. You eat to nourish your body and soul, knowing that the monks around you are doing the same. The act of eating together is not rushed, but a slow, deliberate process. Each bite is taken with the awareness that it is not just for your own sustenance, but for the sustenance of the whole community. It's a time of unity and reflection, a time when the monks can bond over the shared ritual of nourishing themselves both physically and spiritually. But it wasn't just about the food itself, it was about how the food brought them together. The communal meal served as a reminder of the monks' vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and of their commitment to the greater good. It reinforced the notion that they were part of something larger than themselves. As the meal comes to an end, you and your fellow monks rise together, not just to clear the table, but to return to your spiritual practices united in purpose and refreshed by the shared meal. The communal aspect of the monks' meals was just one part of the larger social fabric of their monastic life. Their dining practices were not only about sustenance, but also about reinforcing the values of discipline, humility, and gratitude. The monks' approach to food was designed to bring them closer to each other, to nature, and to their Creator. Yet another key factor in their diet that should not be overlooked is their focus on simplicity and moderation, especially when it came to portion sizes. Despite the occasional feast or indulgence, the monks maintained a modest portion size which is integral to understanding their broader philosophy about food. Historians still debate whether this emphasis on moderation stemmed from their religious vows or was simply a reflection of necessity. On the one hand, their vows of poverty and humility dictated that they not indulge in excess, keeping their meals simple and their desires in check. On the other hand, the monks' strict eating habits may have been informed by a practical understanding of what would allow them to live healthily for many years. Their meals were always designed to sustain them without overindulging. By avoiding excess, they believed they could keep their minds clear for prayer and their bodies strong for work. Imagine sitting at the table, the portion of bread before you small, but filling just enough to keep your energy up. There's no waste, no overeating. The monks knew that too much food could lead to sluggishness and distraction. Instead, their approach was to eat only what was necessary, maintaining a balance that kept them physically healthy without overwhelming their senses or emotions. The act of eating in moderation helped the monks maintain their focus and discipline throughout the day. Their daily meals became a practice of self-control, reminding them to be mindful and grateful for the simple blessings of life. The importance of portion control in monastic life was not just about physical health, but also about spiritual growth. By eating simply and moderately, the monks avoided the temptation of indulgence, which was considered a potential distraction from their higher calling. They believed that by keeping their food intake minimal and balanced, they were better able to focus on their work, their prayers, and their inner peace. Their meals were not a time for self-indulgence or pleasure, but for quiet reflection and quiet gratitude. Now that we've explored the physical and communal aspects of the monks' diet, let's take a moment to consider the deeper, more spiritual meaning that food held in their lives. For the monks, food wasn't just something to eat. It was a way to honor God's creation. Every meal, no matter how simple, was an opportunity to connect with the divine. The act of eating was elevated to a sacred ritual, where the monks could reflect on the blessings of life and the abundance of the earth. This reverence for food was tied to their understanding that eating was an act of sustenance, not just for the body, but for the soul as well. Historians still debate whether the monks' deep reverence for food was primarily a spiritual practice or a practical necessity. Some scholars argue that their eating habits were deeply tied to their religious philosophy, where food served as a form of worship and a constant reminder of God's providence. Others believe that this reverence for food was born out of necessity, a way to make the most of the limited resources available to them. However, it is clear that their approach to food wasn't just about survival. It was about acknowledging the sacredness in every part of life, even the most mundane moments like eating a meal. Imagine yourself in the monastery kitchen preparing a simple dish of barley and vegetables. As you chop the vegetables, you are mindful of every cut, aware that you are using the gifts of nature to nourish your body. The process is meditative. The food is simple, yet every step from gathering the ingredients to preparing the meal is done with deep reverence. You aren't just cooking to feed yourself, you are preparing a meal that will sustain your body, mind, and spirit. Every act of cooking is a form of prayer, a reminder that the food you eat is a gift, and that your role is to take only what is necessary, using it wisely and with gratitude. This reverence for food was deeply embedded in the monks' philosophy of life. They believed that by treating food with respect, they were honoring God's creation and the natural world. Eating wasn't a time to indulge or to feed selfish desires. It was a time to reflect on life's blessings and to be thankful for the simple gifts that nature provided. Even in their fasts and abstentions, the monks viewed food as sacred an opportunity to deepen their connection to God and to the world around them. As we now reach a pivotal point in our exploration of the monks' diet and its significance, it's important to acknowledge the legacy of their eating habits and how their approach to food influenced not just their own health, but broader society. The monks' strict yet mindful approach to food, which combined both asceticism and reverence, created a model of sustainable living that has continued to inspire generations. Their ability to live simply healthily and in harmony with nature wasn't just a reflection of their religious vows, it was also a profound lesson in how we can all reconnect with the cycles of the earth and live in a more intentional way. Historians still debate the lasting impact of monastic food practices on modern food culture. While many of the specifics may have been lost to time, there's no denying that the principles of simplicity, moderation, and sustainability have made a resurgence in modern times, especially in the context of slow food movements and farm-to-table dining. The monks understood something that modern society is just beginning to rediscover: the connection between food, health, and spirituality. Their lifestyle, which emphasized balance and mindfulness, provides us with timeless lessons about the value of eating, with purpose, treating food as a sacred part of life, and honoring the resources we have. Imagine yourself reflecting on the monks' way of life as you sit at your own table today. Whether you're enjoying a meal alone or with loved ones, you can draw from their wisdom. Instead of rushing through a meal, take a moment to slow down, savor each bite, and appreciate the food before you. Think about the origins of the meal, the ingredients, the labor, and the time it took to prepare it, and acknowledge the deeper connections that food offers us both to the earth and to the people around us. The monks' emphasis on sustainability and mindful eating, even in a time of scarcity, serves as a reminder that we have the power to shape our own relationships with food. In a world filled with excess and convenience, the monks remind us of the importance of slowing down, being intentional, and reconnecting with nature. They understood that food wasn't just something to consume, it was a tool for spiritual growth, a means of nurturing the body, and a way to connect with the divine. As we continue to draw lessons from the monks' diet and lifestyle, it becomes clear that their relationship with food wasn't just a personal practice, it was a form of communal harmony. The monks' shared meals were not only a time for nourishment, but also a reflection of their spiritual unity. Eating together, working together, and living together created a sense of belonging and collective purpose. In today's fast-paced world where many of us eat alone or in a hurry, it's easy to forget the power of sharing a meal with others. The monks understood that meals were a sacred time to strengthen not just the body, but the bonds between people. Historians still argue whether the communal nature of the monks' meals was driven by necessity or a deep spiritual understanding. Some suggest that the shared experience of eating together was meant to foster a sense of community and solidarity, reinforcing the idea that they were all part of the same divine plan. Others point out that sharing meals helped foster a culture of mutual support, where everyone, regardless of their role in the monastery, was given the same respect. In either case, the communal aspect of their eating habits provided a foundation for their spiritual practices and allowed them to live together in peace and unity. Imagine sitting at that long table with the monks, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on the stone walls, the meal spread before you. There's no rush, no need to speak loudly. The meal is simple, but it's shared in a spirit of unity. Every monk, regardless of their rank or responsibility, is equal at this table. The shared act of eating becomes a symbol of their mutual devotion not just to God, but to one another. In this silent communion, food becomes a bridge connecting them in a deeper way than mere physical sustenance could. The meal becomes a prayer, a reflection of their shared journey toward spiritual fulfillment. The act of eating together reinforced the idea that no one was alone in their struggles or their devotion. Every bite taken in unity was an affirmation of their shared mission and their commitment to one another's well-being. The meal was a ritual of respect and togetherness, where food served not just as sustenance but as a reminder of their collective spiritual journey. This simple communal practice is something we can all learn from in our modern world. Even as we go about our busy lives, we can take a moment to slow down, eat with intention, and perhaps share our meals with those around us, fostering connection and community. As we near the final chapters of the monks' fascinating food practices, it's important to reflect on the larger impact of their way of living. Their lifestyle wasn't just about surviving the harsh conditions of medieval Europe. It was about thriving through simplicity, discipline, and mindfulness. Their relationship with food offers a counterpoint to the excess and convenience that often dominate modern life. The monk's diet was an example of how one could live richly, not through material wealth, but through spiritual and physical balance rooted in the essentials of life, food community, and connection to nature. Historians still debate whether the monks' way of life was the result of divine intervention, or if they were simply ahead of their time in understanding the value of living in harmony with nature. Some suggest that their practices were influenced by religious teachings emphasizing the importance of self-denial and devotion. Others believe that their practices were shaped by practical concerns, limited resources, hard labor, and a desire for self-sufficiency. But in the end, it doesn't matter whether their approach was driven by faith or necessity. What's most important is the legacy they left behind, a timeless blueprint for living in balance with the world around us. Imagine yourself standing in the monastery garden, surrounded by the crops you've carefully nurtured. The scent of fresh herbs, vegetables, and flowers fills the air. The earth beneath your feet is rich with the fruits of your labor, and the food you've grown will nourish both your body and your soul. Your work here is not just about survival. It's a reflection of your connection to the land and to the divine. You know that by living this simple, balanced life, you are not only sustaining your own health, but also contributing to the well-being of the entire monastic community. The monks understood that food was more than just a means to an end. It was a reflection of their values, their connection to the world, and their commitment to spiritual growth. They saw food as a gift, something to be respected, savored, and shared. They knew that in a world full of distractions and excess, the key to a fulfilling life was simplicity, finding richness not in abundance, but in the mindful appreciation of the things that truly matter. As we delve deeper into the legacy of the monks and their relationship with food, it's worth considering how their approach to eating and living can inform our modern-day practices. In a world that is constantly rushing and indulging in excess, the monks' dedication to simplicity offers a powerful antidote. Their diet wasn't just about avoiding excess. It was about understanding what was truly necessary for a healthy, balanced life. By focusing on moderation, sustainability, and mindfulness, the monks were able to live long, productive lives, proof that we don't need an abundance of food wealth or distractions to find fulfillment. Historians still debate whether the monks' minimalist lifestyle was a deliberate strategy to prolong life or simply a byproduct of their religious devotion. Many believe that their ascetic practices, including their diet, were aimed at creating mental clarity and spiritual focus. Others argue that their dietary habits were shaped by their environment, a necessity in a world where food was scarce, and the seasons dictated what was available. Regardless of the reasoning, the monks' ability to live long lives with relatively simple and natural foods is a testament to the value of a balanced, intentional approach to living. Imagine yourself now reflecting on how the monks' way of life can be applied to your own. In the midst of a world filled with endless distractions and material pursuits, it can be easy to lose sight of what truly nourishes us. Yet the monks' example offers a reminder that simplicity can be a source of both physical health and spiritual clarity. By focusing on what we truly need, eliminating excess, and approaching food and life with mindfulness and gratitude, we can experience a deeper sense of fulfillment, much like the monks did. Their dedication to a simple, intentional diet provides us with a model of living that transcends time. It encourages us to cultivate a more mindful relationship with the food we eat, the way we interact with the world, and the purpose we assign to our daily actions. Just as the monks used food as a tool for spiritual connection, we can use food to foster deeper connections with ourselves, with others, and with the natural world. As we come to the final stretches of this journey through the monks' peculiar but meaningful diet, we find ourselves asking, what is the ultimate takeaway from their way of life? The monks lived in an environment where simplicity wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. And while their food practices were rooted in religious devotion, the principles they followed can be applied to anyone seeking a more mindful, balanced life. In today's world, where overconsumption and waste are widespread, the monk's diet offers a perspective that is both refreshing and profoundly relevant. Historians still debate whether the monk's lifestyle was an ascetic expression of their religious convictions, or whether it was a more practical, sustainable way to live in a harsh environment. But no matter what their motivations were, there is something undeniably timeless about the principles they followed. Their moderation in food, their reliance on whole natural ingredients, and their ability to live within the rhythms of nature were all key components of a life that balanced physical health with spiritual well-being. These practices are not relics of the past. They're lessons for today's world. Imagine yourself now in the midst of your own life, thinking about how the monk's approach to food and living can influence your own daily habits. What if we all slowed down during meals, appreciating the flavors, the texture, the nourishment, and the connection to the earth that each bite provides? What if we approached food not as a distraction or a quick fix, but as something sacred, a way to reconnect with our bodies, our values, and the world around us? By adopting a more intentional relationship with food, much like the monks did, we have the potential to unlock deeper levels of health, peace, and satisfaction in our lives. The monks understood that true nourishment doesn't come from abundance. It comes from mindfulness, moderation, and a deep respect for the natural world. If we approach food with the same reverence, we might just find that we too can live longer, healthier, and more connected lives. And now, as we reach the final moment of this exploration into the monk's peculiar diet, it's time to reflect on the quiet yet profound impact that their way of life has had on history, and perhaps even on us today. These monks, with their simple, disciplined, and mindful approach to food, offer us more than just a glimpse into the past. They provide us with timeless insights into how we can live healthier, more connected lives in the modern world. The key lies in their understanding of balance, moderation, and reverence for the basics of life. Historians still debate whether the monks' lifestyle was a result of necessity or religious devotion. But one thing is clear. Their commitment to living simply allowed them to thrive in a world that often seemed harsh and unpredictable. Their diet, whether it was the bread and water that sustained them or the rare indulgences of feast days, wasn't just about surviving. It was about living intentionally. They didn't just exist. They nurtured their bodies, their minds, and their spirits, creating a legacy of balanced living that endures to this day. Imagine now the final meal of a monk's day. It's not an extravagant banquet, but a simple, nourishing dish, perhaps a bowl of soup made from vegetables and herbs grown in the monastery garden. The meal is finished in the same slow, deliberate way it was prepared, each bite taken with thought, each moment appreciated for its simplicity. And as the meal ends, the monk prepares for the final moments of the day, knowing that the quiet satisfaction of the meal has helped sustain him in more ways than one. The meal is complete, not just for the body, but for the soul. In our fast-paced modern lives, we may not be able to fully emulate the monk's lifestyle. But by embracing their principles, slowing down, eating mindfully, connecting with the earth, and appreciating the simple joys of life, we can enrich our own experiences. The monks remind us that true fulfillment doesn't lie in excess, but in moderation, reflection, and gratitude for what we have. So, as we end this journey through the monks' peculiar diet, take a moment to reflect on how you can integrate their mindful, intentional approach into your own life. Maybe it's slowing down your next meal, or perhaps it's making more sustainable food choices. Whatever it is, remember the monks, they lived long, peaceful lives, not because they had more, but because they appreciated what they had ate with purpose and lived with intention.